So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting of the Redevelopment, Dissolution, Countywide Oversight Board for Santa Clara County. I'm just going to kind of kick things off a little bit. What I thought we'd do is go ahead and do the roll call and then introduce the staff here. My name is James Williams. I'm the County Counsel for Santa Clara County. And then I know we have a number of folks from different successor agencies as well as alternates in the audience. So I thought maybe right after roll call, we could just ask everyone to introduce themselves just so people know. I know we've got folks here from Sunnyvale, Milpitas, and San Jose, and several alternates and others. So if that's okay with folks, and then we can kind of move on with the agenda. But I think it'd be nice for people to just at least know who all is here and who we'll be working with. So I think we'll begin, though, with the roll call for the members.
I'm Glenn Williams with the County of Santa Clara.
Yes, I'm Larry Klein, Vice Mayor for the City of Sunnyvale, and the appointment from the Cities Association.
I'm Tony Estromera from the Santa Clara Valley Water District, but I'm the Special District Appointee.
I'm Matt Tinsley from the Santa Clara County Office of Education.
I'm Ed Medulli, the Vice Chancellor for West Valley Mission Community College District, and I represent California Community Colleges.
I'm Dave Snow with the County of Santa Clara, and I'm a county appointee.
Paul Pasquale, County of Santa Clara, and I am the appointee for the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, Local 21.
Wonderful. So once again, I'm James Williams, the County Counsel, and I'll ask the staff sitting to my right to introduce themselves. Press this button over here.
Oh, that's easy. Hi, I'm Jenny Trice. I'm Program Manager over Redevelopment Dissolution for the County of Santa Clara.
Chris Chaladin, Lead Deputy County Counsel with the County Counsel's Office.
Good morning, Veronica Niebla from the Controller Treasurer Department, Division Manager.
And then if folks want to just stand up and just introduce themselves, I think it'd be nice. I know we've got a contingent from Sunnyvale, Milpitas. Maybe just you guys can just stand up and just introduce yourselves. If you want, you could come forward, but. Thank you. Welcome.
Testing.
Yeah,
Tom Watson, the County Counsel.
Hi, Kevin Freemark, City of San Jose.
Okay.
Mark Masunik, alternate for Matthew Tinsley, Santa Clara County Office of Education.
Good morning, Yoriko Kishimoto at Mid-Penn Regional Open Space District, and I'm alternate to Tony, appointee of the Special Districts.
Dave Berry, County Santa Clara, representative for county alternate for Dave Snow or Glenn Williams.
Good morning, Tony Felice, County of Santa Clara, also a county alternate.
Karen Willis, County Counsel's Office.
Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here. It's great to have many of the alternates here as well for this first meeting. For the agenda, we have a couple just business items that are on consent. I'll just confirm with the clerk that there are no speaker cards, but otherwise, I think we'd entertain a motion if there is one for the consent calendar.
Glenn Williams, I'd like to move that we accept and approve the items on consent.
Second, Matt Tinsley.
So I'll just go ahead because the next item is the election of the chair, but I'll just say.
Do we need to vote?
Yes. So all those in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So the motion carries unanimously. The next item is the election of a chair and vice chair for the Oversight Board. I don't know if there are nominations.
I'd like to make a motion to nominate two individuals with extensive experience. That would be for the chair. I'd like to nominate Tony Estromera, and for vice chair, Ed Meduli. And this is Dave Snow per the clerk's request for first and last name.
This is Glenn Williams. I'll second that.
So all those in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? That carries unanimously. So I'd invite the new chair and vice chair to switch seats and move up to this side of the dais, and let the new chair, Mr. Estromera, take over the meeting from here.
No, you're just on your job. Okay, the usual suspects are here, so we'll move right along to public comment. Now's the time for anyone who, any member of the public that wants to address us on any issue not on the agenda. Understand the clerk doesn't have any requests, so we'll move right along to an overview of something none of us know anything about, the Ralph M. Brown Act. Mr. Williams.
Mr. Chaladin from my office is going to do a very brief training. We always do want to provide some general thing, although we know most of you
good to
are
remind
familiar.
ourselves.
Yes.
Hi, Chris Chaladin with the County Council's office. Chair Estromera stole my thunder because I was going to mention that I recognize pretty much everyone in this room is probably very familiar with the Brown Act. So I'm going to try to move quickly through these slides. I'm hoping for about 10 minutes, including a time for questions at the end. And I'm hoping that the clicker will work. Thank you. So we're familiar with the Brown Act. It's been on the books since the 50s. The essential rule of the Brown Act is that government decision-making process shouldn't take place in the smoke-filled back room, that it should be done in public. So the Brown Act has extensive notice requirements. We also note that in addition to the overall purpose of the Brown Act in promoting openness in government decision-making processes, there also is a competing interest where there are certain situations where government does need to act confidentially, and the Brown Act has specific exceptions for that, for things like litigation, personnel matters, real estate negotiations, that sort of thing. But most of the time, for purposes of this body, the decisions will be made in public. As we all know, the Brown Act applies to numerous different bodies, including local agencies, legislative bodies, and most importantly, your body. The reason the Brown Act applies to your body is because this body was created by state law, the Redevelopment Dissolution law, and therefore we will be compliant with the Brown Act for the conduct of these meetings. The only other thing I would mention on this slide would be the Brown Act does contain an exception for ad hoc subcommittees of your board that do not have to comply with the Brown Act, and there are specific requirements for those, and those would typically be that it would be comprised of only of members, a subcommittee not subject to the Brown Act would be comprised only of members of your board, not members of the public, less than a quorum, that there would be a limited time frame for that with no set schedule set by the Oversight Board, as well as that subcommittee might act on a specific subject matter within the jurisdiction of the board. So for example, in Santa Clara, for the Oversight Board Committee, the Oversight Board in Santa Clara appointed a property disposition subcommittee of less than a quorum of the Santa Clara Oversight Board, and they were able to work with the broker in selling the Santa Clara properties in a much more nimble way. They weren't required to hold a public meeting every time they met, and it worked well. And it's not within the realm, it's within the realm of possibility that your oversight board might at some point choose to establish a similar non-Brown Act committee, and that could happen. So probably the slide that we're most all familiar with, what is a meeting that triggers the Brown Act? Obviously, this meeting is an easy example of that, but the Brown Act also talks about any gathering where a majority of members merely receive information, hear a proposal, or discuss their views on an issue that is within their subject matter jurisdiction. I just mentioned that because a lot of times people think, well, the Brown Act only applies if there's going to be a decision made, but that's not actually the case. We sometimes get questions about things like study sessions. Well, we're having a study session, there's nothing on the agenda for a decision, so therefore the Brown Act shouldn't apply, and that's actually not correct. The definition is much more broad than that. In terms of what is a meeting, everyone is well familiar with the idea that using a series of communications between board members outside of a noticed public meeting, if it involves a quorum of the board, can create a meeting under the Brown Act. So the best example would be typically for the Board of Supervisors, we talk about a rule of two, so a board member can talk to another board member, but beyond that, those two board members, if say one of those board members says, well, I talked to this third board member and that's what his or her opinion is on a particular item, that is a problem under the Brown Act. So in your case, it would be a rule of three. Three board members could talk amongst themselves, but then once a fourth board member is involved, then you're talking about a quorum. The other thing we would highlight too is just that email communication, and most of you who are in the public sector, it's probably a broken record that I say in every training. Every email you send as a representative of the Oversight Board very likely is a public record, and everyone who's writing emails to each other should keep that in mind as they're writing the emails. And even more than that, for example, if the clerk were to send an email to the entire Oversight Board with the agenda, and one of the members of the Oversight Board was to say, hey, I have really strong negative feelings about item 4 on the agenda. Why is that on the agenda? That shouldn't be there. And then another board member chimes in and says, boy, I totally disagree. We really need to talk about that. Those types of email exchanges can get going and also create significant problems under the Brown Act. So we try as an office, as the clerk's office, to say, please do not reply all to this email. If you have questions on an email, it's much simpler to direct that question to staff or to James or myself or Jenny directly, not include all the other board members, so that we're not potentially creating a Brown Act meeting when we really aren't intending to. This isn't actually a Brown Act slide, but we included it. This is more related to the California Public Records Act, just to remind everyone that in March of 2017, the California Supreme Court made a decision in the San Jose case. And essentially the decision was that even if you're using your own personal cell phone or your own personal Yahoo or Google account, to the extent you're doing the public's business, those items are potentially public records. They're not actually shielded just because of the fact that you're using your own personal account. And in the big picture, we all think that that makes sense. You shouldn't be able to avoid the Public Records Act just by using your own personal account. But it does create some personal problems that I've dealt with at the county counsel's office, where if you get a request for emails and the person is keeping them in their personal account, how are you going to go through thousands of emails that we have in our personal account and segregate out the county emails? So in general, the Supreme Court referenced, I believe, a state of Washington and a federal standard that says, well, the employee could submit a declaration essentially saying that they've gone through the emails and that there are not disclosable records in their personal emails. I would say that that's not really a place that any of us want to particularly be, to have to sign a sworn declaration and go through all those emails. So in thinking about this board, I would say that we would try to not have you use your personal email addresses for Oversight Board business. You would probably use, to the extent you have work emails, at least hopefully that would be easier to find using search terms if there was a Public Records Act request or something else. But in general, the overall message is that emails are public records and that we need to be careful with what we're putting in email. I already covered that. So in general, the Brown Act doesn't apply to conferences or similar events open to the public. Those would be like League of California Cities or CSAC conferences. Attendance at meetings of other local agencies, that makes sense because if you're attending a Brown Act meeting of another local agency, the public has notice, so it shouldn't be an issue. and then purely social or ceremonial occasions, provided that a majority of the members do not discuss amongst themselves, other than as part of the scheduled program, specific business that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the agency. One of my favorite things about giving Brown Act trainings is I always Google the Brown Act on the night before I give the training, and invariably within a week or 2 weeks throughout California, there's some issue of the Brown Act. So on this one, the city of Simi Valley had a town hall meeting to discuss a local resident soldier who had been killed in Afghanistan. It was originally going to be 2 members of the city council. A third member showed up, and they started talking about state legislation and the city's position on state legislation. And the city argued that it was a ceremonial occasion, and therefore it didn't need to comply with the Brown Act, and the DA's office in Ventura County is investigating. So in terms of public participation, we have a noticed agenda. I would just mention it's really important that we follow the notice agenda, because the idea is the members of the public can monitor the agenda. They know if their item of interest is either on or off the agenda as to whether or not they need to come down to the meeting. So to the extent government agencies talked about items not on the agenda, it would be very inefficient for people at home to monitor the agendas and participate when they think it's important. Secondly, everyone at public meetings generally are allowed to comment on the item. The idea is that before or during the consideration of the item that the comments would take place, under the theory that then the comments can be fully considered by the decision makers. If you have the comments after the decision, it kind of defeats the purpose of the comment. The one I would mention here is the city of Culver City down in Los Angeles elected their mayor and vice mayor without allowing public comment, and it actually went against their standard practice of who was supposed to be next. And so at their next meeting, about 100 people showed up and complained that they didn't have a chance to speak. They ended up undoing that action and then re-noticing it for purposes of the Brown Act. Public's access to documents. Basically, the idea is that any documents that you have access to the extent feasible, that the public should have access to them at the same time. So for example, agendas of meetings or other writings, when distributed to at least the majority of the body by a person in connection with the subject matter to the discussion, are public records. And then writings distributed during the meeting by either a local agency staff member or a member of your body should be made available for public inspection at the meeting. Just in the paper in the last few days, the Conejo Valley School Board passed out a core literature plan at the meeting, but did not provide copies to the public until the day after the meeting. So again, the DA down in Ventura is looking at that as a potential Brown Act violation. And then if it's submitted by a member of the public during the meeting, it's acceptable for copies to be made and for it to be made available after the meeting, not during the meeting. This was added a few years ago, which you guys already complied with earlier, which is that essentially that the legislative body has to keep track of who voted how they voted for each item. So our clerk's office is well trained on that issue. If it's a unanimous vote, it's simple. If it's not a unanimous vote, then just saying that 6 voted yes and 2 voted no is not compliant, that there's a requirement that each person's vote be identified. We'll do that by a roll call vote to do that. And then, as I was saying, generally speaking, that the Oversight Board can't take action on an item that's not on the agenda. There are some brief exceptions to that, which include things like briefly responding to statements made or questions posed by the public, to ask a question of clarification, to make a brief announcement, to take a brief report on their own activities. And then more commonly, if an item arises during public comment or public testimony, there can be direction given to staff that, hey, we can't talk about this today, but we can bring it back on a future agenda item, and that's very common. The one I wanted to mention on that is on July 10th, the Oroville City Council went against the advice of their city attorney and voted 6-1 to censure one of their members, and claimed that it was an emergency action to censure one of their members. And so they got a notice and cure letter from a member of the public the next day. They had to rescind that action and then retake that action. So my point in bringing up the examples is these things come up constantly on the Brown Act. That's why we try to be diligent and give trainings. And then the last slide is pretty obvious that the legal framework for the Brown Act provides certain penalties and remedies including invalidating the action as I've talked about, and then knowing violation of the Brown Act potentially being a criminal matter as well. So that concludes my presentation. We're happy to answer questions to the extent you have them.
Any questions? Unanimous nod of no. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. We'll move right along. It looks like we have a resolution to approve request for qualifications process for conflicts legal counsel.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, we are proposing here that the board initiate a process, a competitive process, to seek a conflicts counsel. This is similar to what San Jose Oversight Board had in place in the event that there's a conflict of interest that precludes the county counsel's office from providing advice to the Oversight Board. We modeled the proposed RFQ that's in the packet on the San Jose proposal that was done. It's almost identical, just with a few appropriate tweaks to reflect the Countywide Oversight Board and the county, but that's the essential model. Along with this, we're recommending that the Oversight Board nominate 3 individuals to form one of those ad hoc committees that would actually be the ad hoc evaluation panel of Oversight Board members that would review the proposals received and bring forward a recommendation to the Oversight Board. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, James. Any questions?
I can make a motion.
Yes, Dave.
Dave Snow, I'd like to make a motion for Chair Estremera, Vice Chair Maduli, and Board Member Tinsley participate in the evaluation committee to go through the solicitation process and bring that back to this Oversight Board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. So motion is second to adopt the resolution and also to appoint the members mentioned. Any further questions? Those for the motion say aye, or we have a roll call vote. Madam Clerk?
I mean, I think you can go ahead and just do it, and if there's any dissension, you can just call that out specifically.
Okay. We'll do it without a roll. Those for the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Abstentions? Passes unanimously. We'll move along then to our next item, receive report regarding an overview of redevelopment, dissolution, and remaining activities of the successor agencies.
Okay. You got it? Do I have to do anything to turn it on? Oh, gotcha. Well, as it comes up, I'm Jenny Trice, Redevelopment Dissolution Program Manager for the county, and we just wanted to provide a brief overview of redevelopment history, dissolution, and really where all the successor agencies currently are in their status and what you can expect to come to you as actions in the future. If you do, as a Countywide Oversight Board member or alternate even, want additional specific information, we're happy to provide that, and at the end of the presentation we do have links that you can go to get additional information. So on that note technology. I can just go off. Yeah, can I use your notes, please? If you don't mind, I can just go through it. If that's okay, or if it comes up, we can pull it up at that point. Then I don't have to figure out this clicker. All right. So just a quick background on redevelopment agencies. They were created in the 1950s, and their whole purpose was really to reduce or eliminate blight throughout California. And to fund these was tax increment financing. And what that really is basically the year the agency was created, it creates a base year assessment value of property taxes. And as that property tax increases over the years, that delta between the current and the base year is what was distributed to the redevelopment agencies at the time. And that's how they were funded to do their within their project, to do the work within their project areas. So effectively what this did was really it diverted funds that were meant for counties and schools and cities and special districts, and it moved that money to the redevelopment agencies. So essentially what's happening is all of our schools and counties had the same property tax funding that they did back in the 1950s. All that extra property tax growth and inflation was going to the redevelopment agencies. And in 2011, when dissolution occurred, that amount was over $5 billion throughout California that was being diverted to redevelopment agencies, which was over 12% of the property tax alone. So in 2011, when the state of California was in a budget crisis, Governor Brown dissolved redevelopment agencies with AB X126. That was subsequently amended by AB 1484 in 2012 and SB 107 in 2015, and this is what we call dissolution law. And with dissolution, as the obligations of the former RDAs are reduced and paid off, this is more funding that's provided to those affected taxing entities such as the schools and the counties. So going to redevelopment dissolution in 2011, 2012-ish, successor agencies were created to wind down obligations and dispose of all the assets of the former redevelopment agencies. Funding for the successor agencies is provided through ROPS. We call them ROPS, the Recognized Obligation Payment Schedules is their technical term. These are the successor agencies request this on an annual basis. It comes to the Oversight Board, approved by the Oversight Board, and also is subject to California Department of Finance approval. This is done by February 1st of each year. And then there's an amendment that's allowed in September. So that's kind of why we've set up, you'll see later, the meetings we make sure we have a September and a January meeting. So all actions of successor agencies are subject to dissolution law, which you can find in Health and Safety Codes Part 1.8 and 1.85. And there were multiple audits and reviews provided within dissolution law, and one of those, the Housing Asset Transfer Form, that's already completed back in 2012. It transferred housing assets. Then there's the due diligence reviews, also completed back in 2012, 2013. And then what's still pending is the long-range property management plans. These were due December 2015. And what this does, it governs the disposition of all real property assets. So the implementation of these is still ongoing, and this is what you're going to see coming to the Countywide Oversight Board in the future, is as the successor agencies continue to dispose of their properties. So RDAs within Santa Clara County, at the time of dissolution, there were 9 cities with active RDAs. Currently 7 remain active. 2 of them, Cupertino and Mountain View, have been completely dissolved. Los Gatos they have a approved last and final ROPS. So what that is rather than an annual ROPS each year, they have already approved a last and final, which sets their funding for the remainder of the redevelopment or the successor agency. So they don't actually have to come to request funding anymore. So they won't meet with the Oversight Board at all. You won't see them until they're dissolved, which I didn't look, but late 20s or early 30s. So many years. So currently outstanding is Campbell, Milpitas, Morgan Hill, San Jose, Santa Clara, and Sunnyvale. And even those have been wound down a lot. And we'll go through more specifically. Oversight Board authorities and duties. You can look these up later too, but Countywide Oversight Board was created, your body was created by Health and Safety Code Section 34179J, which has all your appointed seats. The fiduciary, in 34179I, it's very specific to say that your fiduciary duty is actually to the taxing entities and the holders of enforceable obligations. So one thing to keep in mind of why you're here and what your goal is. Health and Safety Code Sections 34180 and 181, it includes actions that must be approved by the Countywide Oversight Board and actions that shall be directed to the successor agency by the Oversight Board. So some of these actions include the ROPS, the payment schedules, and any modifications of contracts and all property dispositions. So moving on to the specific agencies themselves, Campbell, they have a long-range property management plan that was effective in 2014. They only had one remaining property, and the actual individual oversight board approved that in the last meeting in June. So that was approved for sale of $213,000. It's expected to close in the next month, but there will not be any more future approvals from the oversight board. And so the only expected future agenda for this agency is the annual ROPS to pay off the existing debt. And Ed Medulli was chair on that one, and then Tony Felice, who is an alternate to the county, he is also on that board. I think that's it. Milpitas, the long range was effective in March of 2015. They have actually disposed of all of their properties and assets, so the only item remaining is the annual ROPS that you'll see come to you in January. And then for Milpitas, we had Glenn Williams, Dave Berry as an alternate, Matt Tinsley was on there. So we have a lot of you have already been on a lot of the successor agencies, so this is good. Morgan Hill was effective March 2014 for the Long Range Property Management Plan, and they have one remaining property, and you'll probably see this one come to you, shortly, soon, hopefully. The last property is the VTA lot. This is a unique property, as the property is owned jointly between the successor agency and VTA, and the successor agency's share is 41%, whereas VTA is 59%. So the county, the city, and VTA are currently working to come up with a plan that's consistent with the long-range property management plan. So you should see that come up at some point. And then so just the expected future items is the disposition of that lot and then annual ROPS. San Jose is the most active agency. They have multiple properties left. Two of them you may see at the next meeting, hopefully, is my understanding. So the Jose Theaters, 62 South 2nd Street, the final bidding should have closed last week, so the purchase and sale agreement should be coming to you for approval next month. The South Hall site, this is the most significant site left in San Jose. That bidding closes July 30th, and so we should expect to see that approval for the purchase and sale agreement in August as well. San Jose Stage has already been approved by the Oversight Board for sale to the stage company, I believe, and that should close they had 90 days to close, so that is around October of this year, but there's no further approvals needed from you. The Sheraton Hotel is a participation interest and promissory note. The agency intends to hold on to this property until the note has been partially repaid, so that comes, I think, in maybe the mid-20s, so I don't know that we'll see that at any time soon, but it's not a real property like normally what you would imagine, like land and building. It's a promissory note and interest. San Jose, continue. There's also compensation agreements, and compensation agreements are agreements between the city and the affected taxing entities, so it's a way to dispose of the property with an agreement between all the parties. So there are a few properties within San Jose that are pending compensation agreements, and we have the Diridon properties, which is a group of many properties. Almost done. And then the California Theater. We have currently those Those agreements have been signed by 13 of the 14 signatures, so we're just waiting on one, and then they can continue disposition and transfer those assets as set out in the compensation agreement. So hopefully we'll see those, but they won't come to you for approval. And then there's the Billy DeFrank site, and the Countywide Oversight Board will need to approve the disposition of that in future meetings. So the expected future agenda items is the annual ROPS, the purchase and sale agreements. Most recently is the San Jose Theater and the South Hall, probably next month, and then you have the 938, the Alameda disposition. Oh, now I can move it, huh? Now I have to figure it out. So we have. Can I go to, I need to go back one. Oh. Oh, okay. So I'm on Santa Clara status, please. Oh, no, down one. One more. There. No, that's okay. All right. So now that we're almost done. Santa Clara status. The long-range property management plan was effective in December of 2015. There's a handful of remaining properties. The north-south lot should be closing, I'd say, within the next couple days. That was approved on the last Oversight Board agenda for $7.5 million that went to the city. The interesting thing about Santa Clara is that a lot of their properties so far have been sold through a broker, and the broker that they have consistently used and has been very successful within the city of Santa Clara is East Still Secured. And I just kind of wanted to point him out, but Tommy Kim has been working closely on that from East Still. So you'll see him and Greg, I know I'm going to say it's wrong, Choth, right? We'll bring the items to you regarding the sales. So currently right now is the Great America site. So they're in the process of marketing Great America, and so that sale should come to you. It's currently being marketed in for, I'd say, maybe a month or so. So we should see that in a few months for approval of the purchase and sale agreement. And then remaining is Techmart office building, the Hyatt Hotel Santa Clara, and then there's the convention center and the parking garage, which is currently should be pending a compensation agreement. So those are the expected future items. The interesting thing also about Santa Clara is that they have no future ROPS that will be coming to you. With the first sale, they sold the Irvine Company buildings. It sold for over $100 million, like $112 million. And so it paid off all of their obligations. So all future obligations have been paid off. So the only thing they're doing is disposing of assets rather than paying off obligations. So in the future, you won't see the ROPS, but you will see Great America purchase and sale agreement. The Techmart and the Hyatt marketing process should be coming to you. And then the convention center and garage compensation agreement we should expect. The Sunnyvale status, oh, next one, sorry. Sunnyvale, different about Sunnyvale is they don't have an approved long-range property management plan, as those were all due December 2015. So they just have a few properties. Dissolution law allows for them to dispose of it without the long-range property management plan. So we should expect to see that at some point. They had just a few parking lots, some of them including environmental remediation. So it may be a little longer for those to be disposed of. Sunnyvale also has outstanding litigation. There's Sunnyvale 1 and 2, and the decision was reached in the appellate court, pending petition for review before the Supreme Court. And then Sunnyvale 3 was fully briefed pending the appellate court hearing. And then so the expected future agenda items are annual ROPS, and then the disposition of remaining properties. So that kind of gives you a quick background of ROPS and redevelopment and tax increment. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask, and then feel free to go to the link provided.
Question. Two thoughts. First, just for clarification for other board members who may not be familiar with Santa Clara, you listed 4 properties for sale, but just for clarity, the successor agency does not own those properties. They own the land underneath those properties. And so what we are selling are ground leases, not the properties that are named on the report that you just gave. In other words, we don't own the Hyatt Hotel. We own the land underneath the Hyatt Hotel. Okay? Second question, is it possible for us to get the successor agency for Sunnyvale to bring back to us next meeting a summary of what the environmental issues are on the remaining properties? Sunnyvale is one of the successor agencies that I know very little about. And so having an understanding of what the environmental remediation necessary is would be extremely beneficial for me. So could we get some kind of a summary back for our next meeting?
I mean, I think we can certainly ask the Sunnyvale staff. I know that they'd provided some material to their oversight board in the past, and maybe they can basically take that and package that together and bring it for the next Countywide Oversight Board meeting. I'm seeing some nodding of heads, but I know that stuff had been shared with the Sunnyvale Oversight Board in the past about that.
Great, thank you. I'm not asking them to reinvent the wheel. I just
No,
would like to
they
get
did
brought
share.
up to start.
They have shared previous information about that with the Sunnyvale Oversight Board. So,
thank you.
I don't know if you want to add anything to that. You can come right up in the middle here. There's actually a microphone built into the stand there. So yeah.
John Nagel, the City Attorney of Sunnyvale. We're in the process of working on a compensation agreement with the county for 2 of the parking garages. I don't know if we'll make the August. We might make the September. For efficiency purposes, I think it would be good to combine the environmental discussion with those compensation agreements rather than coming twice. So if we're capable of getting on the August, we'll be glad to share that, or most likely it would be in September.
That's fine for me as long as we have it in advance of us being asked to review anything or take any actions.
And sort of in a nutshell, just as a little, there were 2 dry cleaning plants that leaked dry cleaning chemicals through their sewer lines into the ground and into the groundwater. And we're waiting and been working with the water board for years to get final approval to no longer do any remediation. And if dry cleaning chemicals are particularly challenging, and so we're not we won't be able to say by this date we know we will have no further action letter necessary or no further remediation needs to be done, but we'll make it a little bit more sophisticated than that when we come back to the board.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, so the intention was just to have this be very high level. So we know that many of you have served on a number of individual oversight boards, but none of you served on all of them. So we wanted to just ensure, and some of you hadn't served on any of them. So the intention was just to give a very high level 30,000-foot view of kind of big picture what might be coming up. Obviously, you should expect thorough staff reports and materials when you're actually asked for action on any items, and we're happy to provide any additional information or background or work with the appropriate successor agency to bring back specific information as needed. The full presentation is posted online, so apologies for the technical issue, but it was posted when the agenda went out, so you can just take a look at that if you want to refresh your memory about what the status was. Our intention for this meeting was just to have these administrative items handled and answer any of those questions, and hopefully we'll have a couple substantive items like some property sale approvals for action when we meet next. But unless there are other questions or general questions, I think that concludes the material that we have for today. And I would just say thank you very much. It's volunteer service, and we know that. We know it's complicated. We know many of you have been at it for many years. And so I would just reiterate, our thanks for your service on this board.
Thank you, James. Yes, there.
Yes. So not to cause any issues, and I understand staff is trying to set up these meetings. The dates that were chosen, so we basically chose 4 Mondays going forward at different times